This Sunday, we continue in our worship series that we have called the Christ-Patterned Life, and we have looked at numerous individuals, characters, personalities from the Gospels to see what is it that they do in their life or in the midst of an encounter with Jesus that is worth emulating. What is it that we see in the Gospels that can be part of our daily life with one another? And so today we're going to focus on compassion, and so a starting point for that is the compassion that we see throughout Jesus' ministry from start to finish throughout the Gospels. Whenever Jesus encounters someone who is in need of healing, who is in the midst of pain or suffering or has been pushed out of the community, or even in times of Jesus' own grief, like when he loses his friend Lazarus, he's stirred. There's this churn down in his bowels, down in his gut. And that is the source of motivation. Jesus is stirred, and it is with compassion that he responds. Perhaps it is giving sight to the blind, touching the ears of those who cannot hear. He feeds the multitudes. Like today, he speaks words of healing and forgiveness into someone's life. And so I think that there have been times in your lives when you have felt that gut pain, where you've been so unsettled by the pain or the suffering or the grief, or you've seen someone around you that you love immensely, a family member, a neighbor, a longtime coworker, that you're compelled to respond to them with mercy, with compassion, to do something that might alleviate the weight of their life, even if for a moment. So that, for me, is a starting point when I look at what the friends of the man who is paralyzed do for him. I don't think that the guys who carry the cot are necessarily family, but I think there's some relationship there that exists between the man who's paralyzed and these friends. Otherwise, it makes the story all that more incredible. This man who is paralyzed, he's on his cot, and his friends carry him into town. Folks have come from the hillsides in Galilee and Judea to see Jesus. He's teaching in a home. And so the man on the cot is brought up to the threshold of the home, and it's standing room only in the house. It's crowded, and there's no opportunity for the man to be taken in. There's simply no space. And here the friends have an opportunity. There's a fork in the road. They could persist, as they do, or in their frustration, they could have said, "There's no space, not here, not now," and turned and left. What they do next is beyond the realm of possibility, almost. Out of their compassion, this yearning to help lift the weight of their friend's paralysis, they climb up on the roof of a stranger's home, of a neighbor's home, and they begin to peel back the roof tiles to break into this man's home so that their friend can be lowered down and placed right in front of Jesus. In a moment, Jesus compels them for their faith because it is their action that has made this possible healing take place. Surely the friends have to be motivated by compassion. Otherwise, why would they go to such great lengths to put their friend before Jesus? I see their compassion that turns into action as a sign of discipleship, as a sign of their love for God and their growing love for neighbor. Spiritually mature individuals are compassionate. We heard it lifted up in our Colossians text. The more you grow in love with God and the more you grow in love with your neighbors, that the pain of your neighbors, you feel it, and you want to be present in the midst of their suffering, literally to suffer with them. We have to learn how to do that. We have to be trained on how to do that. I don't think that it's a natural inclination for most of us to run towards pain and say, I want more of that. But we know that that's what Christ has done for us, and so we do likewise with our neighbors. I invite you to imagine your life as an empty 5-gallon bucket as a starting point. And there are things that happen in the course of life, expected and unexpected, that we place into the bucket, and these things are like heavy granite rocks, the heaviest things that can possibly happen to us. It could be the loss of a parent, a spouse, even a child. Pregnancy loss, the loss of a marriage, abuse, addiction. Your whole life unraveling. You can take one granite rock, and then you add another one, and suddenly that empty bucket is a little bit heavier to hold than it once was. And then imagine that there are additional events that are not quite as heavy as the granite rocks, but still they fill up space. You find out that a childhood neighbor that you haven't seen in years, or a sorority sister from college, or a fraternity brother, that something's going on in their life, or perhaps they've passed. And it hurts a little bit, but it's not on par with those really heavy things. And those things are like grains of sand, and you add some of those in. Or a job loss. Or resentment from unresolved conflict. Or grief that's just simmered right below the surface for years. And suddenly you add in those big granite rocks and you pour in a couple grains of sand, and that bucket is filling up rather quickly. So how is your bucket this morning? Because I get to be one of your pastors, I know some of your buckets are feeling pretty heavy. You've added in a whole lot of things, and it feels like the sand level is right to the top. Add one more granite rock and the handle's going to break. Others in this season of life, it's you're walking down the path and you're swinging that bucket joyfully back and forth. It's feeling pretty light. Thanks be to God for that as well. So somewhere all of us fall between these two poles with some level of weight in the bucket, and in that image I see compassion being one of two things, possibly. Walking up to your neighbor that you know is carrying this immense weight, and you reach over and you put your hand right beside theirs and you exert a little bit of energy to lift. Their bucket becomes a wee bit lighter, so that what is an insurmountable weight feels a bit lighter, and they can imagine taking that next step. Or maybe compassion is being in relationship with a loved one or a friend or a neighbor or a brother and sister in Christ, and you help them excavate some of the sand out of the bucket. Help them do the relational work that is freedom and forgiveness and reconciliation. Maybe you're waiting for someone to see you, to walk over, and without asking, just to put their hand right beside yours and help lift. Maybe you're in need of that this morning. And as Brady's saying, indeed, somebody is praying for you in the midst of this space. Or maybe you've got capacity in this season, this moment, where there's only a few grains of sand in your bucket. Maybe Christ's invitation is for you to come alongside a neighbor who is under an immense burden and pour compassion into their life. Take up a bit of their pain as yours. For me this week, I came across the news of a pastor who I did not personally know, was never in the same room with him. And he died by suicide. And he had been very outspoken, very public about his struggles with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation over the years. And had started a nonprofit to address mental health care and mental health care access and destigmatizing depression and all of its nasty neighbors. And I learned about Pastor Jared Wilson's death through a social media post of a pastor friend here in Nashville. Through Jason McAnally, who is the lead pastor at Home Church, United Methodist congregation here in Middle Tennessee. And here is a brother of mine, a pastor I'm in covenant with, expressing this tremendous loss that a former staff member of his had died unexpectedly and tragically. And so I asked myself and wrestled with what does, especially knowing that I had to preach on this text, what does compassion look like from me to those friends that I have who are active at Home Church, who this morning have this gaping hole, losing Jared, their former pastor, to suicide? What does compassion look like for me in that set of circumstances? So I wrote to them, to the whole staff at Home Church, offering my condolences and offering the condolences of Christ United Methodist Church, saying, we too grieve that you've lost a pastor and a friend to depression and suicide. And for me, I know that it's not like I was reaching into the collective bucket and excavating a granite rock. I know it wasn't that. But it felt like I reached in and picked up a few grains of sand and dropped them. I hope that that's the kind of weightlifting, an act of compassion for me to them this past week. There's no shortage of opportunity in our daily living, in your life, in our life together, to be compassionate, to literally suffer with one another, to grieve with one another, to meet one another in the heaviest moments of our lives. Some of you are in a season where it feels like I don't want another event or set of circumstances in which to be compassionate. There are enough already. You may be feeling my bucket handle is about to break. Please make it stop. Some of you are caregivers. You're healers by the nature of your profession. So you're always carrying the handles of the buckets around you. This morning, one thing that we want to conclude with is there are times in our life together in Christian service where we go beyond our friends and our family and the life of the local church to be in deliberate bucket-lifting ministry with others. And often our young people model this for us quite well. And so I want to invite our Associate Youth Director, Katie Rhodes, to come and share a witness for the ways that some of our young people have gone to serve with Camp Barnabas. Katie.
As I was reflecting on today's scripture, I realized something that had never occurred to me before. Maybe getting their friend to Jesus wasn't the most important part of the story. Maybe it's more about being Jesus to those around us on the way. Or, as Adam said, carrying each other's buckets. This summer, I had the privilege of taking a group of 15 youth and 3 adults to Camp Barnabas. It's a camp for people with special needs in Purdy, Missouri. Camp Barnabas is one of the most special places I have ever experienced. Barnabas looks like any other summer camp, complete with high ropes, rock wall climbing, swimming, archery, and a craft hut. The only difference is that every activity that Barnabas offers is adaptable so that people of all abilities can enjoy them. I'm quite passionate about their ministry, so if you have a few hours, I'd like to talk about it. Just kidding. But no, seriously, if you want to get coffee, I'm all about it. In order to keep this reflection to my 6-minute allotment, I will give you just some of the highlights. I saw Jesus in every single one of the adults and youth on our trip who selflessly put their own needs aside to make sure their campers had the time of their lives. I saw Jesus in Tate Dillon, who physically levitated from excitement when his camper arrived. I saw Jesus in Riley Wade, who loves Barnabas more than anyone I know, and who got a camper who absolutely hated every minute of camp. Riley continued to show up day after day for her camper, always suggesting activities for him to participate in, and continued to love him even when he refused to do anything. I saw Jesus in Bryson Biskner, who took a crash course in American Sign Language so that he could communicate with his camper all week. I saw Jesus in Eli Seifert, whose camper had cerebral palsy and needed to be moved every hour throughout the night. Eli was visibly exhausted all week long, but never once complained and smiled the whole time. I saw Jesus in a young man from another church whose camper had autism and wanted to do nothing else the entire week but sit in the cafeteria and listen to a vacuum cleaner. This young man laid on the floor with his camper, turned on the vacuum, turned off the vacuum, and wound up the cord. Laid on the floor, turned on the vacuum, turned off the vacuum, and wound up the cord, over and over, all week long. When offered a break, he simply said, "No thanks, I'm here to serve." While these are just a few of the examples of where I saw others carrying buckets for their campers, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about one of our youth in particular. My role at camp was cabin mom, which means that I was assigned to a single cabin to help with whatever they needed. I was a shoulder to cry on when the task got too overwhelming. I was a set of extra hands to help bathe a camper. And I did laundry. Lots and lots of laundry. Only 2 of our youth were assigned to my cabin, Caitlin Townsend and Hannah Biskner. Hannah's camper, Alexis, was nonverbal, though she could use some sign language and a really cool iPad app to communicate. She had a condition that made her tongue not work properly, so she used a feeding tube to eat. And though she could walk, it took Alexis a little extra time to get where she was going. Hannah and Alexis bonded immediately. Hannah was responsible for Alexis 23 hours a day. She helped her get ready in the morning, escorted her to activities, bathed her, and helped her get ready for bed. The very first night that Alexis came to camp, I had just walked into the cabin to see Alexis already dressed and lying in bed, Hannah reading her a story and stroking her hair. Each day, Hannah and Alexis had to leave activities early before meals to go to the well house where the nurse's station is so that Alexis could get her tube feedings. The nurses took care of most of the work, so Hannah entertained Alexis and jumped in to help when needed. Alexis is able to drink liquids, so the cafeteria staff provided her with a pureed meal, mainly just for taste, since her tube feedings provided her nutrition. There was only one line for special diets in the cafeteria, and for a camp with a lot of special diets, you can imagine how long that line got at each meal. Hannah would wait patiently in line for Alexis's smoothie, often condensing her own mealtime down to about 15 minutes, knowing that Alexis would only take a couple of sips. Hannah did it all with a smile because she loved Alexis and had compassion for her. Each night after the campers had gone to bed, the cabin staff and missionaries would sit outside and have cabin talk. We would discuss the difficulties and special moments in our day, encourage each other, have a Bible study, and eat junk food. One night, in the middle of the week during cabin talk, the nursing staff came to flush Alexis's feeding tube. While they were in the cabin, Alexis began to have a seizure. Hannah immediately, without question, went inside to help. The seizure was so severe that the nurses had to radio the well house, and other nurses came with medication to stop the seizure. It was a very scary few minutes, but thankfully Alexis was okay. She slept well through the night, but vomited in the morning. Hannah cleaned Alexis in her bedding without complaint. I know that many other missionaries at Barnabas had harder work to do than Hannah, but as her cabin mom, it was a joy being able to witness her compassion, patience, and tender love toward Alexis that week. Friends, compassion isn't something that only Christ can show, and we don't have to go all the way to Purdy, Missouri to show it either. We as Christ followers have the ability to show compassion to everyone around us every day. As we continue to worship, I invite you into a time of silent response.